Welcome back to Banjo Strings and Anvil Rings. This is Chapter 2 of our journey. If you haven't heard Chapter 1 yet, you might want to start there. Otherwise, get comfortable and let's dive in. Chapter 2. Jack. The early evening summer sun painted the Stevens farm in hues of amber and gold, casting long shadows that stretched across the rolling hills. The Appalachian Mountains stood tall in the distance, their rugged peaks veiled in a soft haze as streams whispered unseen among the dense oak and hickory forests. The fertile valley below was dotted with neatly stacked hay bales and grazing cattle, a pastoral scene that seemed timeless against the backdrop of West Virginia's enduring beauty. Jack Stevens sat on the front porch of the farmhouse, his boots propped on the weathered railing. At 5 feet 6 inches, Jack wasn't tall, but he carried himself with a confidence that made his stature seem irrelevant. His lean, wiry frame was the result of years spent working the land and wildcatting with his father. Muscular arms and broad shoulders spoke to his strength, while his hands, calloused and strong, bore the marks of labor and grit, a testament to his time handling nitroglycerin and wrangling drilling equipment in the oil fields. His dark brown hair, cut simply and often tousled by the wind, framed a face that could shift from stern determination to mischievous charm in a heartbeat. Jack's hazel eyes, flecked with gold, carried a spark of intelligence and a hint of wanderlust that set him apart from the grounded practicality of his sisters. A light dusting of stubble on his square jaw gave him a rugged edge, while his easy smile softened his otherwise sharp features. The scent of freshly cut hay mingled with the earthy tang of cattle, grounding him in the land that had been his family's livelihood for generations. But tonight, even the farm's familiar comforts couldn't quiet the pull he felt, a yearning as vast and untamed as the mountains surrounding him. The screen door creaked open, its hinges groaning in protest as Grace stepped onto the porch. Barely taller than 5 feet 2 inches, Grace carried a petite frame with a quiet strength that belied her small stature. Her auburn hair, neatly tied back, caught the light as she sat beside Jack, a dish towel clutched in her hands. "You've been awfully quiet today," she said, her voice soft but knowing. Her sharp brown eyes, so like their mother's, studied him. "What's on your mind?" Jack sighed and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He tapped the brim of his worn leather hat against his knee, a habit of his when deep in thought. "I've made my decision, Grace. I'm joining the Navy." The towel stilled in her hands, and her shoulders tensed. "The Navy?" He nodded, his hazel eyes locking with hers. "It's time. I've seen all I can of this place. There's a whole world out there, Grace, and I'm not going to find it sitting here on this porch." Grace looked down, twisting the towel between her fingers. "What about us? What about Alice?" "She looks up to you, Jack." Jack reached out, his strong, calloused hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "All right, every chance I get. You've got each other, and you're strong enough to keep this place going. Besides, this isn't goodbye forever. I'll be back." "You sound so sure," she murmured, though her furrowed brow betrayed her worry. Jack leaned back, his gaze drifting across the valley. "Those summers with Pa, out on the rigs, they gave me the confidence I needed. If I can handle nitroglycerin and oil geysers without blowing myself to kingdom come, I figure I can manage the Navy." Grace chuckled despite herself, though her worry lingered in her eyes. "Those summers made you who you are, that's for sure. But the Navy will take you farther from home than any oil field ever did." "That's the point," Jack replied with a grin. "I want to see it all, the oceans, the cities, the people. It's a big world out there, and I'm not going to spend my whole life wondering about it." The screen door swung open again, and Alice bounded onto the porch. Petite and full of energy, her strawberry blonde hair shimmered in the fading sunlight. At just over 5 feet 1 inch, Alice was the smallest of the Stevens siblings, but her quick wit and fiery spirit made her presence impossible to ignore. Her brown eyes darted between Jack and Grace, suspicion knitting her brows together. "What's not forever?" she asked, planting her hands on her hips. Jack stood, his shadow stretching across the porch. "I'm leaving, Alice. Joining the Navy." Her face fell, and she crossed her arms. "Why? Don't we mean anything to you?" Jack crouched down, his hazel eyes meeting hers. He placed his hands gently on her shoulders, his voice calm but firm. Alice, you mean everything to me. That's why I'm doing this. The world's a big place, and I want to see it. But I'll always be your brother. Nothing's going to change that. Her lip trembled, but she held her ground. What if you don't come back? I will, he promised, his tone steady and full of reassurance. And I'll write to you. Every letter, every story. I'll share it all with you. Just like I've always shared everything. You promise? On my life, Jack said, pulling her into a hug. As the sun dipped below the hills, Jack began to regale them with tales of his wildcatting days. His voice carried the thrill of danger and discovery as he described striking oil, the ground trembling beneath their feet, and the earth roaring as black gold surged upward. And just when we thought we'd gone too far, Jack said, his grin widening, the rig started shaking like the devil himself had hold of it. Next thing we knew, bam, oil everywhere. Grace rolled her eyes, but a smile tugged at her lips. You're going to give Alice nightmares with stories like that. Alice, sitting cross-legged on the porch, shook her head. I'm not scared. Jack always knows what he's doing. Right, Jack? Most of the time, he replied with a wink. But figuring it out as you go, that's where the fun is. Their laughter echoed across the valley, a bright thread in the quiet tapestry of West Virginia's hills. That night, as the stars emerged, Jack lay awake in his room. The excitement of the unknown buzzed through him, but beneath it was the steady love for his family. He would carry their voices with him, their stories shaping the man he was destined to become. And though he would leave the mountains, streams, and valleys behind, Jack Stevens knew one thing for certain. His heart would always find its way back to the home that had made him who he was. And that was Chapter 2 of Banjo Strings and Anvil Rings. Jack has made his choice, but how will Grace react? What comes next? Stick around for Chapter 3, coming soon. If you love storytelling and history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a chapter. See you next time.